Now, a lot of you guys been up on the roof while we were working on this one and seemed like we weren't getting anywhere. It's fixed finally. Yesterday, Paul and I finally got it running. Chef told me this morning it's been 36 degrees, so it's holding. But boy, oh boy, I've never had anything that's such a bad problem. If I went to your house, and as many times as we went to work on it, and we said, oh, this is bad, oh, this is bad, oh, this is bad. And I see my technicians sometimes do that, and I'm like thinking, man, this guy really doesn't know what he's doing, you know? But legitimately, everything we replaced needed to be replaced. But the unit was cooling. It's a walk-in refrigerator that, you see this, they fabricate that on site. They measure the distance of the cooking area, and these are just walls that they build together on site. When I did commercial back in the 80s, I helped them fabricate a couple of walk-in units by building this. And when they put this together, this is just nothing more than a giant cooler, like you would go to the beach and you'd stick all your beers in or whatever you want to stick in there. And that's just a cooler. So what they do is they have this piece inside the cooler, and this piece can be installed many places. It could be sitting right on top of the cooler, or it could be somewhere in the kitchen away from all the other equipment, or it could even be outside. In this case, it was on the roof of the building. And what they do is these two lines run to the back of this. I don't have an image to show you, but one line's going in, one line's going out. What are those two lines called? Now, give me 1 second here. What are these two lines called here?
Discharge and suction.
Discharge and suction. So where does this discharge line actually go?
Goes to the condenser.
Goes to the condenser?
Or, well, it was coming from the compressor.
It does go to the condenser, but our units had something in between, but that's okay, I'm gonna bring it up. So you aren't wrong, because on most refrigerators, this line going into your refrigerator is the same as in the residential refrigerator. This is just a giant refrigerator, okay? So it's working the same way. So what's the larger line?
Suction.
And where does that go?
Goes to the compressor.
It goes directly to the compressor. So the compressor goes into the condenser. Here's your compressor. The condenser's there where the fan is, and we'll go through it more. I got better pictures and images. And then it comes out the small line, which is a 3/8 line. It comes out this line, and this line runs to the evaporator. Okay, and from the evaporator, it returns back on the suction line from the evaporator, the big line coming back into the compressor. So the compressor pumps on the roof, and from the roof it goes down into the cooler, and from the cooler it goes back to that unit. That is the circulation. I'm not going to go into teaching refrigerant cycle. I'm going to talk about the components and all the problems we had, and how we found them, and how we even approached the troubleshooting problem. Because the chef called me or sent me an email and said, hey Richard, my walk-in cooler, not the freezer, the refrigerator part, was dead. Now, on his unit, you walked in one door and you were in the refrigerator, and then there was another door, and if you walked into that door, there was another room right behind it, and that was your walk-in freezer. The freezer's working fine, and it has its own separate components, but you had a door here, and on the other side was a door, and it went right into another room that I put them back to back. So it made like only one entrance in and out. So if you wanted to go in the freezer, you had to walk through the fridge to get to the freezer. But that's okay. So the unit wasn't cooling at all. So we went up on the roof. Well, first, let's go back. First thing is we walked into the cooler just to see what's going on. Did anybody that went with me on the first day remember what we saw? No cool. First thing we did is we walked into here, right?
Right.
And what did we see happening?
No cool.
Yeah, but was there anything running?
Yes, the fans were running.
The fans were running. Those were always running. We didn't have a problem with the fans. But it was like 80 degrees in there.
Yeah.
It was hot. And the kitchen's cold. But when the door's closed, it's insulated to keep the heat out. So if it's cold out, it's not gonna get cold inside because it's insulated to keep that out. So we saw these fans running. Now, all that really is in here is the evaporator. There's a few controls and the fans, but the fans are running. So if the fans are running, that's telling me, hey, the machine's calling for cooling, I would assume. What would this be similar in a residential refrigerator?
Here and there.
What in a residential refrigerator? Air handlers like central air.
Oh, yeah.
You're right in your idea, but where would this be? Where would this be?
It'd be in the freezer.
In a freezer. We'd have the coils, and we'd have fan motors, right? So this would be inside your freezer, and this would be out in the back of the fridge. That's all it is. It's the same thing, okay? So we see the fans work, and now we go up on the roof, and this is that condenser that I had the other image taken apart. And nothing was running. So what do we look at when nothing's running on this unit?
Pressure switch.
Well,
Why pressure switch? I mean, you say pressure switch because you worked on it, but let some other people
Okay.
answer some, because you were involved from day one. A lot of the other people were only involved in part of the repair, not the whole repair.
We have Freon in there.
Okay, but like, we got a condenser fan, right? We got a fan motor there. What else components electrical do you see in this picture?
Compression.
We got a compressor,
first you check the disconnect. Make sure
we got
it's-
pressure controls. One second before we say, and then what's this?
accumulator.
Receiver.
Receiver. Accumulator is on the evaporator. Accumulator catches liquid refrigerant that leaves the evaporator. It's supposed to be 100% vapor, leaving the evaporator. The evaporator, vapor. Okay? So if any liquid comes out of there, this will catch the liquid. Well, actually, that's the accumulator. The accumulator will catch the liquid coming out of the evaporator and prevent it from getting sucked into your compressor. But in this case, this receiver
It's for the oil.
is somewhat for the oil, but it's also trying to help with that change of state of refrigerant, okay? So we go in right here and we come out right here. Now this black piece right here is called a service valve or a king valve, okay? And that's how we access the system with our gauges on these units. A service valve or king valve, this is what that is. I don't know if these are tight, I can't take them off, but give me a second. And I'll pass this around for you guys to look at it. This is a service valve, okay? If we were to look at it, this has a mounting bracket here. The actual mounting on this, if you look at it when I pass it around, you're gonna see a hole and threads inside. There's nothing there. What that was is that this king valve was meant to be installed on the base of a machine like this with a screw from underneath holding it down. Okay? This is not the exact one of our machine, but this is one to explain. So what would happen is Freon would come from the receiver and go into this pipe here or go into this pipe, okay? In this case, that is this one and this one here. You see this opening here, let's just say this is coming out. This is connected to the unit. So don't know how to do it like that, but this one is this pipe and this one's that pipe. So it comes in here, goes through the king valve and goes out to the machine. Okay? So what we have here is a place where we connect our gauges, our hoses. In most refrigeration that you work on, you're going to have a little core inside, the actual valve. When you connect the hose presses on that valve so we can access this system. There's no cores in this. So when you're servicing, this is where you're going to connect your hose, but you have to manually open and close the king valve. This is a service wrench, almost like a ratcheting box wrench, but I'll just put it in the camera. I don't know if you could see it.
Yeah.
It's sort of square on the ends there, okay? It's not hexagonal like a bolt. And on the bottom of this king valve, we put this tool and we can ratchet it one way or the other way. That's how we open or close this valve for service. So we got 3 positions of that valve. This position, if it's all the way up, so in other words, if I turn this and push it all the way up, inside is a piece of rubber that goes up, but if you see, it seals this off. And what that does is if I go to this unit and push it all the way up, Freon will come from the condenser, go to here, and stop. It can't go any farther. That valve is closed. If I have this open, no Freon's going to come out. Nothing's going to get in the system right now. But if I do open it and the compressor's running, could I suck in air from this side? Yes, because this goes to, this is coming out, and where does that go? It goes to the evaporator. So we got to be careful when we have this thing seated here and we take the cap off. Best thing to do is to connect your gauges when the unit's not running. That way it won't suck air in and it won't blow Freon out under high pressure. Because when this thing's running, this thing is somewhere between 250 to 350 PSI. Okay? And some units are even higher. Now this is an R22 unit. So now, if I backseat, which means I unscrew it and go all the way down, all the way, I'm blocking off the service port. So when you're disconnecting your hose, you want to bring this all the way down. So we want to ratchet this like this. So I'm going down on it. And then once it stops turning, I just go slight torque. Don't over tighten them because there is a seal in there. A slight torque. So what that does is allows Freon to come in, go through this valve and come out the other end, but there's no Freon escaping from here. All right? So now, what if I want to read the running pressures? Well, if it's backseated, all I want to do is I just want to open it back up. About that much, just 2 or 3 turns. By doing that, I moved it up a little bit where it is here in the middle. Notice there's Freon on all 3 of them. So my gauges are going to read the pressures and the Freon's going to flow through like it's normally operating. So in order to service the system, we had to use a service wrench to get to the king valve. Now there's one of these on the high side here on the receiver, and there's another one right on the compressor low side, the suction line. Okay, any questions on the king valve right now? All right, so we had to get in there and put our gauges on there. And I ain't gonna tell you what we saw yet, because I wanna get to the next slide. So we got a lot of things to cover on this.
Do most systems usually have
Let me get my, well, you guys saw that. What was your question before I played again?
do most systems usually have a king valve on the low pressure side and the high
On
pressure side?
commercial.
Yeah, on commercial. Okay.
Central air conditioners, they'll have them on the unit outside the home where the 2 lines run in and out. They'll have king valves on them as well. Not all central airs have those, okay? But central airs may or may not have a king valve. And sometimes, instead of the king valve having a stem sticking out, you have to have a piece like this that goes down in a hole and opens and closes it internally and instead of externally. So instead of this, you have a piece like this that you put on your wrench that goes inside the valve and opens it. Like sticking an Allen key in there, okay? But that's on more like central air. We don't have those on small residential. This is a commercial walk-in cooler in a commercial kitchen. So it's still a refrigeration unit, okay? So I want you guys to look at this video. This is that condenser fan. Now it started getting dark. Every time we come out here, it's like 5 o'clock. We start at 6 and we're in the dark. So what's going on there?
Barely moving.
What?
Barely moving.
It's barely moving. So we go there and we say, hey, something's wrong with that fan motor. This fan motor is moving that slow when this unit's running. You could hear the compressor. That's that humming noise that you're hearing. It's the compressor. But that fan's running slow. Now, sometimes a bad capacitor can do that. We tested the cap and we even changed it. It didn't have any effect on it. So, guess what? We need to replace the fan motor. Now, one thing I didn't talk about. There were so many things I'm trying to remember everything we did while I was putting this together. Now, when we got here, the thing wasn't running, and someone said check the quick disconnect or the shut off on it, and we had power. So on this unit, there's a control box there, something called a contactor. And a contactor is just like a big relay. And you can push on the contactor like as if it's being energized to run. And all a contactor is two switches. So you push it down and the switch is closed and they turn the unit on. So this unit running, or the noise we heard, was because we were pushing down on the contactor, just trying to see what was happening. And the two things I want to do, what do I always tell you guys when you're doing a sealed system job, for those of you who have been in here and done it, what do I always tell you to do when you're charging a refrigerator? I want you guys to do something with your hands.
Feel.
Feel what?
The heat.
The heat from the condenser. Okay? So this is the discharge line coming off the compressor going right into our condenser. And you can feel that thing getting extremely hot. Okay? If it gets hot, as we're putting some Freon in there, we have pressure controls. We have some pressure controls here, and I have this one here. I don't have the original one here, but this is a dual pressure switch. This pipe actually connects to this pipe and to that pipe there, high pressure and low pressure. So this one on your left is the low pressure control, the one on your right is the high pressure control. So it's connected to the system, and Freon actually goes through this pipe and is what is cycling these on and off. And inside, they're like a water level switch, a pressure switch, but it's working off Freon pressure. Okay? So we saw the bad condenser fan motor, but the only way we got it to run was pushing on the contactor. So maybe we could have a bad contactor because it wasn't turning on by itself. But we know we had power when the thing was there. So what happened was we found out it wasn't getting power, and this pressure control is 2-in-1, low pressure and high pressure. They are in series, means that one wire comes in and goes through here, goes through this device, and then comes out there, but it is a dual pressure control. Now I'm going to come back to this because I'm talking about the pressure control that
We got it.
Okay, so here is similar to a dual pressure control, but this isn't the exact one that I wanted, because if you look at this information here, how does the pressure control work? What is the function of a pressure control? What do you guys think the pressure control does?
To regulate the temperature and to either shut off or to keep it open so it reaches the desired temperature.
Yes, that's part of it. The other part of a pressure control,
Safety.
safety. Okay, so we have two controls, one monitoring the low pressure side of the system, one monitoring the high pressure side of the system. Okay, so here's the low pressure. Directly indicates the cut-in and differential. The cut-out is calculated by subtracting the differential from the cut-in. You guys all got that, right?
So we're talking.
Want to say it faster? No. So in other words, one of them is cut in and one is differential. So first of all, this is actual temperature, or not temperature, pressure. Okay? So if we're looking here, this is PSI. So approximately what pressure is that arrow pointing to on the right-hand side?
38.
35, 36.
36. No.
Well, that's 20, that's 30, that's 40, it's about 35, right in the middle.
38.
Okay. And then, so what does that mean, differential? They're saying that that's 36, the differential is 20, so cut out 16. What does that mean?
It can be anywhere in that range.
No, what does it mean, cut out 16? Think about it.
Out.
What's cutting out?
open the switch, 60.
And it's cutting out what?
The compressor of the system.
It's opening up and shutting off the compressor. So when the compressor is running, if the pressure gets so low, compressor is gonna shut right off. Okay? But then while it's off, what's gonna happen to my pressure?
It's gonna drop.
He's gonna build
It's
again.
gonna rise.
No, remember, no, listen, we're talking about the low side of the system, so the compressor's pulling freon from the low side, the pressure's dropping as the compressor's running. I turn the compressor off, what happens now? The
Low side
pressure
is-
slowly goes back up because the freon in the condenser is going to equalize the system. Okay? That's what that 20 is, so it'll cut out at 30, well, cut in at 36, it'll cut out at 16, so when the pressure gets to 16 or lower, the unit will shut off. When the compressor goes off, the pressure's gonna rise, and when it gets back to about 36 PSI,
Turn back.
it's gonna come back on, and it's gonna cycle on and off. Now that can be used to control temperature inside the box, but this one's not controlled that way. Now, that's the low side. The high side doesn't have cut in and cut out. The high side is 100% safety. It was set to about 350 PSI, and if it got that high of pressure, it'll shut the unit off for safety. Do you think that fan motor running that slow might cause the high side pressure to go up?
Yeah.
Why?
It's not cool.
It's not getting the heat off the
It's
condenser.
diagnostic the heat.
Remember, air conditioning, refrigeration, it's not cooling, it's removal of heat. So if that fan's going so slow, it's not removing enough heat. Heat is pressure, heat is temperature. So heat's going to rise that pressure and can shut it off for safety reasons. You could also have a dirty condenser coil. I went to one customer's house for an air conditioner and they were complaining it wasn't cooling. And it was like a mobile home. And they had it right outside the window, but I noticed it was right next to a dryer vent, right next to it. And you couldn't see it from the outside looking at the coil, but when you looked inside, the condenser coil was covered with dryer lint. So your dryer filter only catches about 10% of that lint, the rest blows outside. But in this case, it was getting sucked into the air conditioner and blocking the condenser. That's gonna cause higher head pressure, okay? So that's the pressure control. So the compressor control had the unit off. We pushed the contactor and it started running, but then we saw the fan running slow. So I said, wait a minute, before we even worry about the fan, let's find out why we have no freon in here. Let's get the gauges on the system and let's check it. We put gauges on it, we basically didn't see any freon at all. Now I'm gonna come back to the fan in a moment. Oops.
We got it. There it is. Mm-hmm.
That is the pressure control. We put dye in the system of freon in there and it's leaking out of the pressure control. So,
What it looks like.
this thing doesn't allow me to like pause the video. Okay, it did. Let me go back just a little bit. Explain to you what you guys are looking at.
Lo viene a poner como ven y por la noche compramos.
Okay, so if you guys are having a hard time understanding what are you looking at, it's this exactly like that. Okay? So you're looking at the back corner of this pressure switch and it's dripping right out of here with the cover on it. So we're not looking inside of it, but we're seeing it leak out of here, which means the freon in this is leaking in the actual pressure control. So we need to replace the pressure control. So here's where our first problem came in. You know, we have an air conditioning class next door. Why aren't they working on it? I don't know. But this air conditioning class has components and stuff like that. And I said, hey guys, do you guys have a pressure control? Okay? And they gave me this pressure control and said, here. And I said, well, do me a favor, adjust the settings for the high side, the low side, and the differential. So we adjusted the settings. I said, guys, go on up there and install it. Now, this thing only has 2 wires. I'm going to show you a wiring diagram in a minute that's going to show you what they do. But anyways, I got this pressure control, and my mistake was not giving them specific enough instructions, because now they created more work, and we'll get into that. So they went to change the pressure control. So there's this pipe with a valve body on it. You can see it soldered on right here. When they were installing the pressure control, this is what they call a flare fitting. That is a male flare. This is a female flare. And a female flare looks like a trumpet, like the end of a trumpet. And it fits right up against the metal of the male flare. And when you tighten this nut, the pressure that you put on seals this metal against the other metal on the valve and keeps it from leaking. Well, whenever you're doing plumbing or refrigeration like this, you have to use 2 wrenches, one here and one on the valve, so as you're tightening, the valve don't move. Because what happened when I wasn't there is they only used one and they ripped the valve right off. So I said, okay, I'll solder it back on, which is what you see here. The problem was, and you can see, I think my leak was right there. I'm standing here looking at that pipe, and I'm brazing behind the pipe, and I can't get to that side. Plus, I can't get underneath and look up because it's inside the unit. So after once or twice trying to fix the leak, and I couldn't get the leak to seal, I drilled a hole in the pipe and I soldered over the hole, just sealed it right up, and put a new valve in there and connected the pressure switch to that. Is that the high side or low side when you're looking at it? What are you looking at there? High side, low side?
That's the high side. I'm sorry, that's the low side.
High side. High side.
I say,
Actually, it's low side. That's a large pipe. It's coming right off the compressor here. Look, compressor, suction line.
that was the other one.
I was like, yeah,
Yeah, that's the
thick ass high side.
Okay, the larger pipe's always low side, low suction, okay? So, let me use the computer screen. I keep going to the mouse. So you can see here, I sealed it up down there, and I drilled a hole with a drill right into the pipe, stuck the pipe in, and soldered that pipe on there so I can get a pressure read. Now, we put in the new pressure control, which this was the one that they gave me. Okay? And we put it in, and there's 2 manual resets here. Those of you who came in late, there's some pizza back there. There's 2 manual resets here. One for the high side, one for the low side. Every time we tried to charge this unit, the low pressure kept popping this, and we had to manually reset it, turn it on. And I could never get it to stay on long enough to charge the unit properly. So as we're trying to charge the unit, this thing keeps resetting. I said, the heck with it. I'm tired of it. So we have now 2 separate controls. Where this one is what they call a dual. It's got the low side on this side and the high side there. This is just a single low pressure one. The high pressure one is there. It doesn't have the fancy face on it. But now we have 2 controls, but we only have 2 wires. Okay? So if you look at the diagram here, forget about this oil safety switch. It goes into the high pressure, and from the high pressure, it goes through the low pressure to get to the compressor. So those 2 switches have to be wired in series. Well, I only have 2 wires. So we had to fix that. So we had 1 wire from the controls coming in here, and it used to be 2, and we moved one of those 2 to here. So now what we had to do is we had to create a 3rd wire and just jump in between. So power came in here, came out here, went in through the other one, and then went back to the controls. So before we only had 1 control with 2 wires. Inside this control, and I'll let you guys look at it when I'm done, There's actually two different switches inside this control. One's a low pressure switch, one's a high pressure switch, but both those switches are in series with each other. So when we separated it, now we have two separate ones. We had to go in one, out that one, into the other, and that one back to the power. Yes.
When you say you jumped it between, you wired that wire directly to the one that was coming in, right? So
Mm-mm.
on the low side, or is there an actual inlet
Well-
on that?
On this one, had a place for two wires.
Okay.
So we went in with one wire. We had to add a wire coming out.
Yeah.
And connected it to the bottom of this one. You can see one wire there. There's another one just like it, just below it. And then this one went back into the power supply.
Theoretically, could you wire it like with a wire nut or some sort of just a way to connect it, be it solder? Could you add that wire directly to the one coming in? Would it do the same thing?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
So instead of adding it to where the inlet is on that device, could you theoretically add it to the wire that was coming in from power? Versus using the inlet, just let's say you soldered the wire together, you twisted it together. Could you still use that same wire coming in, or does it have a separate?
Well, they're
function?
two separate wires, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So all I had to do is have a wire jump in between the two controls. So I had one wire here, one wire there,
Mm-hmm.
and then I just added one piece of wire from one to the other. I can't solder the wires together because if I do, I'll bypass one of those switches. Thing is though now that I have two separate controls, I have to have a way to connect the two of them together. So I went one wire into the low pressure. From the low pressure, I added an extra wire to the high, and then the high back out.
Yeah. So you still have them in series?
They are in
Yes,
series,
It
yes.
was a dual. Just
Yes,
separate.
it's the same as the dual, but two separate units.
Yeah, I just didn't know if you made them parallel by adding that, or
No, series. They're
Okay.
both in series. Okay.
Okay.
I still quite don't understand what you said, but we got it.
No, I got it.
So that's the pressure control. So we put the pressure control on, and the fan still wasn't running fast enough, but I wanted to get Freon in there to make sure we didn't have a leak. So we put nitrogen. We didn't see a leak. We pulled a vacuum. Now we're adding Freon. And we're adding Freon. And we're adding Freon. And when you would first turn it on, this discharge line would get hot. What else should get hot besides the discharge line?
The suction.
The condenser.
Pointing at it, the condenser. So on the side, can you see those coils right here? Those are the side loops of the coil. And when you first turn it on, you could start to feel all the coils pulling heat. About 3/4 of the way down. And then after a minute or two, the heat goes away. Now the pressures, I looked up the pressures. We have an R22 system. And the low side pressure is about 60, and the high side pressure is about 250 to 300. Our high side pressure was about 225, 250. Our low side pressure was only 10. And we kept adding Freon and adding Freon. No matter how much Freon I added, I couldn't get it above 10. Now, right here is something called a sight glass. Now, I didn't have time to add that to the presentation, so let me see if I can get a YouTube real quick to show you something. Can't see.
I was looking at first. It's a leak. It was,
Okay, so I want you to look at this image. So look here.
Alright, I just wanted to do a quick little video here. This is my personal unit. I've installed my TXV outside.
Okay, so real quick, the sight glass is here on the right, this gray part. This is called a TXV. We're going to get into that in a minute. TXV stands for Thermostatic Expansion Valve. That is the same as our capillary tube. What does our capillary tube do?
dryer, filter.
No, what does the capillary tube do? It connects into the dryer filter, but what does the capillary tube do?
Keeps the evaporator at a certain amount based on the temperature of the evaporator.
It's a metering device. I'm not asking expansion valve, I'm asking capillary tube. What you're saying is expansion valve. Capillary tube, the size of that tube and the length of that tube is determined by whoever designs this refrigeration system, okay? And they say, well, you need this .001 cap tube and you need 3.5 feet of it, or whatever it is. If you cut it short, you will change the pressures in the system, and the pressures are what makes our temperature. So this expansion valve function is to control the flow of Freon into the evaporator. So if the expansion valve is bad, we won't have proper flows. I know what it is. Okay? So we're gonna get to that, but I wanted to get to the sight glass. Let's see if it shows you what I want you guys to see.
That way I can, you know, adjust it, or, you know, it just keeps it from having so much wear and tear. Anyways, I'll put a sight glass on it, which is pretty cool.
Perfect. That's what I wanted.
You don't normally see.
Did you see the bubbles?
Yeah.
Okay. Leaving the condenser, the refrigerant is liquid or vapor at that time?
Liquid.
It's liquid off the condenser. It condenses. The evaporator is vapor. So we want to see liquid flowing through there. In a car, when we charged the car AC with Freon, they had sight glasses back in the day. And you just kept adding Freon until all the bubbles were gone. When the bubbles were gone, you were charged. Okay? But we were charging this refrigerator, or refrigerant unit, whatever, and I had 250 on the high side, but right after my valve, I'm gonna show you, I had a sight glass. And we looked at the sight glass and we couldn't see anything inside the sight glass. Not one bubble, nothing. It looked like it was almost pure liquid, but it wasn't. So we had now a restriction. And the Freon was not flowing through the system like it was supposed to. So now, we had another problem. I'll call you. So, let's go back to that very first image. Or at least here. The sight glass was right here. But I have my gauges right there, and I'm reading 250 PSI. What is the 250 PSI telling me at that point right there?
What's in the line?
Wait, you, go ahead.
They have pressure up over there.
I have pressure up to there. What do you want to say?
I'll say what's in the line.
What's in the line?
You say.
Either one of you guys want to say something? No? Okay, so if that's hot, and then these coils are hot when I first turn it on, and then the heat goes away. This is important, because it's the same thing in residential refrigeration. A lot of people say, well, how do I know if it's a restriction? Well, when we have a restriction, pressures are lower than normal. And I'll explain that in a minute, because a lot of people say, yeah, but isn't the high side going to be way high because it's pumping all in the high side? You would think the pressure is going to go way up. It goes up at first, but once all the heat's released, that Freon is like it's sitting in your Freon tank at 70 degrees. It's just sitting there. There's no more heat. Remember, heat is pressure. So once the heat's released from that condenser and the Freon's not leaving, the pressure actually drops a little bit normal than running pressures because it don't have the heat. So what happened is we were running it, you feel the heat on the coils, and then after a few minutes the heat would go away, but the top line, the discharge line, was still hot. Compressor was pumping, but it was pulling from the low side and kept me at a 10-inch PSI. I'm supposed to be 60. Every time I had Freon, it went down. So I didn't see it here, so I assumed, okay, well, the only thing between here where I have 250 and a sight glass where I don't see anything is my filter. Maybe my dryer filter is restricted. Okay? So if my dryer filter is restricted, will I have Freon come in the sight glass?
No.
So I said, okay, let's do the dryer filter. Now I'm not telling you all the things we did in the order, but these are all the different things we kept running across. So every time I go on the roof, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. Okay? So we went over there, found the pressure controls weren't keeping it running, We did, just to let you know, have 60 PSI on the low side and 250 the first time we charged it when we had a leak. We had good pressures. But the problem was we had to fix the leak, then we had to fix the condenser fan motor, and if you see, that's a brand new fan motor we installed. So when we were doing all these pressures with the sight glass, at that time, the fan motor was already replaced. So we went there, found no Freon, replaced the low pressure and high pressure control twice, fixed this. Then we had to replace the condenser fan motor, and I'll tell you all the problems we had with that one. And I wasn't getting Freon flowing through here. So let's go to the fan motor, explain it to you, and then let me tell you how the other half of the system works and what we had to do to finally get this thing going.
So what the number one problem was at first?
Freon leak. And a bad fan motor. You missed, I showed a video of the fan motor playing. You'll probably see it as I go back here. Let me see something. You see this fan? Those of you guys that came in late, watch the video.
We got it.
That's the Freon leak
There it is.
on the pressure control. Okay? I'll get back to that in a minute. Watch how fast the fan was running.
That's real bad.
Another dad joke, I said. Okay, so that was that. So we had to go back inside now and see, why am I restricted? Because we took the dryer filter off and with the pipe, and we connected it to a nitrogen tank, put 100 PSI, and it went shh right through the dryer filter. The filter was not restricted. But we put a new one on anyways because there was no Freon in it. The pressure controls were replaced. We had the system open. We might as well change the filter anyways, right? So we changed the dryer filter. We go back on the roof with a new dryer filter, and we again, for the 4th or 5th time, try to charge it. Now what we did, because this is R22, and a tank of R22, which used to be about $30 back in the day, is somewhere in the neighborhood between $800 and $1,200 for the same tank.
Right now?
Yes.
Wow.
You cannot buy new R22 anymore. They stopped making it 5-10 years ago. It's 410A is what they put in ACs now. But what happened was, is we had to recover the Freon. Now what do you guys do? Now those of you who worked on the unit on the roof, what do you guys do? You got a recovery machine, a vacuum pump. You're on the roof of the unit. Guess what? There's no 110 volt plugs up on the roof. You can run a 100-foot extension cord down the roof and into the building, or you can do what we did.
Get power from
You
the
can make your
machine.
own, you got power up there already.
Well,
You can rig it.
we got 240 coming in here, right? So I'm not gonna show it to you today, but I'll show it to you another day. We do have it. Paul, can you grab it real quick? The cord with the,
Alligator clips?
no, not alligator clips, we actually had terminals. But you can connect that. So you can connect that to one of the lines, because it's 240, right? So we have line 1 and line 2. Line 1, how am I gonna get 120 volts if I only have 240?
You connect one to line 1 and then one to neutral.
There is no neutral on this unit.
Oh, ground.
Ground. And that's what we did, is we took an extension cord that had female outlets on it and with 2 wires, and we connected one to the contactor where the power is, and we connected the other one to ground, and we had 110 volt for our vacuum pump and for everything else. So alligator clips are okay, but sometimes they just don't grab tight enough. So this is what we made. We have an extension cord here where we cut the end off, and then this one here went to the contactor for line 1, and we attached this one here right to the frame of the machine for ground, and we had 120 volts. Because line 1 to ground or line 2 to ground is 120. So we could use our 110 volt vacuum pump, and since I have 3 here, I could have had a lamp or a light up there, because every time we went up there was nighttime. You know, so you could hook up different equipment to this, and this is how you would run it if you're on the roof of the building.
Did you connect that with power on?
Huh?
Did you connect that while the power was on?
No, the unit has a disconnect.
Okay, I was like-
Every unit on the roof has a disconnect. You shut the disconnect off, connect this.
Okay.
But, I mean, if I had to, I'd wear safety gloves and connect it. I could hold gloves, I could hold a pair of pliers and connect this. I connect the ground first, because the ground got no power.
Yeah.
And I could take this and just push it out with a pair of needle nose pliers with insulated gloves.
Yeah.
Proper insulated gloves.
It ain't gonna show.
Well,
Okay, so we let me get back to where we were. So we had to go downstairs. Before I get to the air handler, let's go to condenser fan motor. Okay, so we ordered a condenser fan motor because you saw how slow it was going. And I'm going to go through this in just a minute. I did talk about it the other day, but I'll go through it in a minute. So this is the old motor. You can tell it's all rusty and everything. This is the original motor. Notice that the back of the motor and the side of the motor has these retaining clips. The replacement motor don't have retaining clips. So the motor was fine when we got it. I'm going to admit it. We screwed it up, or I screwed it up. When you took the blade off, it slid off so easy, it was like butter. Usually when you're taking a blade off, like a condenser fan outside, it's rusted and corroded, and you have to cut the shaft with a hacksaw or sawzall, and then I put a deep socket and try to beat the shaft through and get it out of there. But in this case, it came right off. So for the heck of it, I went to put it on the new motor. I got 3/4 of an inch in, and it went ink, and I couldn't pull it off. So I'm holding the motor, like I'm holding the motor by the blade. The shaft of the motor is here. I'm just holding the blade. And I'm hitting the shaft, which is the whole motor, is just hanging by the shaft. Figured the motor would just drop right out. Well, instead of the motor dropping out, the back just came right off. So I said, let's take it back and see if we can fix it. So we tried to get it back locked into these tabs on the outside, but that is holding the back bearing of that motor. And if it's not perfectly straight, the inside part of the motor rubs. The motor was done. I gave up. The next day they would come with a new one, and we ended up having to install a new one. So I busted a bad motor, or busted a good motor. But instead of having these clips on here, that would have never happened to me. It's just cheap aftermarket replacement parts. Okay? So let's go to the wiring diagram for a second. This motor, is it a 115 volt motor or a 240 volt motor?
They're like 204.
I don't know. Look at it before you talk.
It's a double speed motor.
It's what?
Double speed motor. The one end say 115, the other end say 220.
So which one is it?
Both.
You can wire it on either way. You can
Yes.
wire it for either side.
This motor is like a universal motor.
Yeah.
So if you're going to connect it for 115, the white wire goes directly to the power, and the purple and black get connected together to the other power, and the yellow and orange connect to each other, but they don't have any power wire going to them. They're just wired at it together. Okay? So that's on the motor, and then yellow and brown, that's for clockwise, and this is counterclockwise, and I'll explain that in a minute. If you go to 240, the white goes to line, and the purple goes to line, but orange and black go to INS. What is that?
it's insulated.
Insulated. It means it's not used. It's just capped off. Okay? So if you could see, we got yellow and orange together here. We're not using the yellow at all in 240 volts. So basically they just changed the way the winding is and actually created higher resistance for the higher voltage so that it runs the same speed. Okay? So that was that. Now the clockwise, counterclockwise things I pointed out was, if you look at that plug right there, let this stupid thing play out. Okay, so if you look at this plug right here, that plug is the direction of the fan motor. So when you're replacing like a central air, the condenser fan motor, or the air handler, if the motor was going the wrong direction, you could unplug it, turn it around, and plug it back together again. Either the two yellows and two browns together, or yellow, brown, and that would be whether the fan runs clockwise or counterclockwise. Okay, so we installed the new fan motor, came with a capacitor. We installed this, and we did install this. I haven't told you why we installed that yet. So now, we changed the fan motor, because you saw how slow it was running, it was bad. You saw our pressure switch were leaking, right? Those were bad, right? So why am I replacing the receiver? It's just a tank. It wasn't restricted, because I had Freon come in here, and I had to go to here where my gauges are, reading pressures. Why did I replace that?
Contamination?
What?
Contamination?
Nope.
Was it leaking oil?
It was leaking big time. Let's go to, let's see here, nope. So remember I told you at one time, this thing was cooling and it had the right pressures. So I was like, okay, we got it. We're charging it, we're getting heat off the condenser, our pressures look good. We changed the fan motor, we got the pressure switches going. I'm ready to get out of here, I'm done with this thing already. Well, I don't know if you guys can see it. You see those little tiny bubbles right there? As we're trying to shut it off, I can feel Freon coming out that shaft right there. Well, that's not where the Freon flows through. That is where you open and close the valve. It was coming from in here. So guess what? The king valve is bad. And it's not really serviceable where you can take this apart
You have to replace the whole tank.
and but you can't replace this because it's attached to the tank.
Yeah, you have to replace the whole tank.
And that's what this box was. This box was the new tank. Yesterday we threw out the old one, so we don't have it. What?
You can't put a cap on it?
The cap's not going to be good. It's not going to seal under 300 pounds of pressure. You could probably put the cap, there is a cap that goes on it,
Temporary.
but
Shoot right off.
it's going to leak.
Yeah.
No, when I go by the cap, you know, most caps have a O-ring in it.
Yeah, but this seals up here,
Oh, okay,
and
okay,
it
okay.
covers
I got you.
this. It's that big,
Oh, okay, I got you.
okay?
I thought it's.
So if it's leaking,
It's leaking.
change it. Listen, I think that only cost us 50, 60 bucks. The fan motor was a little bit more, and the pressure switches were like 200 bucks. I think I was probably into this thing for probably, I don't know, 450 bucks, 400 bucks, and that's a little high on the parts, because some of the parts were given to me from the AC class. If I was to do this job, this is $1,200 job, parts and labor, okay? Yeah, it was a pain in the butt, but it took me 2 or 3 weeks to do. Why? Because we were only doing it for an hour or two, couple nights a week. And we weren't doing it like if it was a company and I needed a part, I'd leave the roof and go get that part and come back that day or the next day and complete the job. But, you know, I'm trying to teach you guys, and I have a business in the daytime, and I'm trying to fix this unit, and I find out something's wrong. Now we got to go through the school system, we got to order it, and it becomes a whole mess. So let's continue. So it's leaking oil now. So I had to get a new reservoir tank. Luckily, the pipes don't even need to be brazed. Both inlet and outlet are just a flare fitting. You just unbolt it. Now this one has the hole like the king valve. On the bottom it had a stem with a nut. So you had to actually go underneath the machine. The machine's on an elevated platform. So you get underneath it and take the nut off so you can remove this. You see there's no feet. There's only one nut from underneath and the pipes hold it in place. Okay? So we replaced the king valve. But we still had a restriction. Let's go on even further. I tell you guys, I mean, you hear all these things I'm telling you. I'm not done talking about this. This is how long we've been fixing this thing and all the things I've been doing. Okay? So we fixed the Freon leak twice, right? The king valve was leaking and the pressure switch was leaking. We fixed the fan motor. Fan motor was going so fast. But now we have a restriction. Well, guess what? How many parts do you see there? In this picture on the right here.
2.
3, including the evaporator, I guess?
Yeah, but electrical or mechanical is really just two parts. So this is your TXV. And I'll explain in a minute how that works, okay? But thermostatic expansion valve, that takes the place of the capillary. Freon's coming in through here, going through this valve, and it's going out that valve into the refrigerator. And these were like equalizing holes. They help make the valve open and close properly. I'm not going to go to deep detail. And this piece here is on the suction line. So the main body's on the liquid line coming in, high pressure, but the sensor is on the suction line going out. So Freon's coming in here, and Freon's going out here, and you can't really see it, but there's another line right there. So what's happening is this valve is sensing the temperature of my suction line. Now I'll get into that in a minute, but what do we have here? What does that look like?
Pressure switch.
Solenoid.
It's a valve. And guess what? That's a solenoid, a magnetic solenoid, like a water valve, right? 120 volts, it opens a valve and lets Freon go through. No voltage, the valve's closed, no Freon goes through.
It's an expansion valve?
No, that's the expansion valve. This is just open close. Why? I'll get into the whole cycle of how this works in a minute, but I need to explain step by step. Everything I'm telling you is sort of the order in which we discovered what was wrong and how we fixed them. Okay? So this valve, if it's closed, will keep the Freon up on the roof and won't go to the evaporator. So either this or the expansion valve is bad. So what do we do here? How do we approach this and how do we check this out?
Disconnected.
Well, how would you check if a valve wasn't working? What test would you make? A water valve wasn't working.
Continuity test.
You what?
Continuity test. To check feed it.
See, power goes to it. The power
Power.
doesn't open.
Now, and a continuity test is not bad, but when we troubleshoot 99% of everything, we troubleshoot with voltage, because I want to know, is the machine sending voltage there? Because if I don't have voltage there, my valve's not my problem. It's whatever sends voltage there. And guess what? We checked voltage, and it wasn't running. So wait a minute now. I never really worked on a walk-in cooler like this. It's a refrigeration system to me. I don't get, me, I look at it, hey, it's Freon, it's just pressure and compressor. It's the same crap, commercial or not. But the controls, I don't have a schematic. So let's take a look at a schematic. So I have the service manual for it. One thing nice, Parts Town is a commercial website, and they provide free manuals for almost every brand, commercial. So you can get a lot of manuals here. So if we go down into this here, I'm going to show a simple diagram right here. Now, our fan assembly inside the air handler, has two fan motors, right? But we also have that solenoid. You see that solenoid here? Liquid line solenoid. That's the solenoid that I showed you inside the machine. And there's a thermostat that controls that solenoid. Now we checked power. We didn't have power there, but guess what? The power that runs these fans is the same power that runs that solenoid, and these fans are running. So I know I got power coming in. I know it's calling for cooling. Now I don't have power here. The only thing left is what? The thermostat. Okay? All right. Let's go further. That thermostat was mounted on those two holes right there in that unit. This sensing bulb was on the other side, and that's where the evaporator is, where the air goes in and the air comes out here. So this is sensing the temperature of the air, and when it gets cold, it shuts that valve off. Now, follow me, because I'm going to explain how all these components, one causes another component to do something, okay? So this valve gets shut off by that thermostat. This is the actual thermostat on that unit. Look at those dials and look at those numbers and don't say anything. I'll make it bigger for you to look at that dial. Oops. Sorry. Look at that dial. Take a minute and look at it, and look at all those numbers and tell me what you think those numbers are.
Temperature? So when to,
Temperature, but why do we have two sets of numbers? Yeah, George.
Differential?
Not differential. This is only got
so
on and off. Yes.
it's, to shut it down if it gets too cold, to turn it on if it gets too hot, no?
It's a thermostat, yeah. I mean, a refrigerator thermostat, when it gets hot, turns the refrigerator on, and when it gets cold, it shuts it off.
Yeah.
So when this gets cold, too cold, shuts off that valve, stops the freon. Okay? And I'll explain this all. But when it gets warm, opens the valve back up, lets freon go into the evaporator. But we have numbers on the inside, numbers on the outside. Well, you probably didn't notice it, but somewhere on here, it says C for Celsius on the inside temperatures. Because what temperature is freezing in Fahrenheit? 32, right? What's temperature freezing of Celsius?
0.
0. So if you look at the 0 here, it's right about 32. Okay? So I checked this out, and the thermostat was open. But wait a minute, the box was 80 degrees. That thermostat should have been closed. So I grabbed this dial by my hand, and I rotated it. I think I rotated it this way to a higher temperature. And as I did, I felt and heard click, and I heard the solenoid click. So guess what? My thermostat here was stuck on old refrigerators. Who was it that was working on a refrigerator? Someone bought a fridge. Was it you that I told you hit it with a screwdriver? Yeah. That someone bought a refrigerator in here last trimester. Wasn't running at all. Emmanuel was checking it out. I said, before you do anything, get a screwdriver with the, hold it by the screwdriver part, not the handle, and right where the dial is, just do that. He's looking at me like, what? I said, yeah, just give it a good back. And he goes like the back, no, back. And he goes, back. And all of a sudden the refrigerator came on. And he looked at me like, what the heck? Listen, old style refrigerators, now the newer ones now, everything's electronic, okay? Old style refrigerators have a mechanical thermostat. This is a mechanical thermostat. It has a tube filled with gas, and when it gets cold, it shrinks, and when it gets hot, it expands, and that gas or fluid that's inside, sometimes it's like a hydraulic fluid, it expands and contracts on temperature, it pushes the switch. But sometimes if the unit's off and got humidity in there, sometimes the switches stick. I've had customers back in the day, they had a refrigerator, a little top mount refrigerator, and bought a new fancy one, and they put the refrigerator in the garage, but they didn't plug it in. Later they said, hey, I can use it as a garage fridge. You know, I'm cutting the grass, I can have my drinks in there, whatever. But it didn't come on. You just, bam, and the thermostat came right back on. And 9 out of 10 times, it cycles just fine. Okay? So I hit it, and the solenoid went there. Now we were able to charge it because the valve opened. Yes?
You could have jumped those 2 wires also, right?
I could have jumped them to see if it would work, but if I jumped them, the solenoid would not cycle, and that would cause a problem with cooling.
Right. I'm saying just to see.
No, yes, for testing purposes, I could bypass it. But when I hit it and it clicked, I didn't need to do that. So let's just talk about what happens in the system. Let me go back here.
Are you, from what he said, how would you jump that?
You could use an alligator clip, 2 alligator clips on a single wire and just clip it, or you can take 2 wires off and connect them together. Anything like that. Just make sure the 2 wires are. You can take a little piece of wire, undo those 2 screws, and run the wire in between. Because all it is a switch, and the switch is just metal touching those 2 screws together.
So to check that with our gauge, we'll check that,
But with an ohm meter, it showed open.
yeah.
which is what we tested. Yes, sir.
The valve is normally closed. When power is sent to it,
It opens, that's
So
correct.
that's why
He's
we
talking
do-
about this valve is normally closed, but when you energize it is when it opens. Okay? Now, the AC teacher had told me that if I had like these microwave magnetron magnets, I don't ever throw the magnetrons out when they're bad. I take it apart and save the magnets. You could take this off the top, take the solenoid off, and you could put this right on. It's got a hole in there. And you can put on it and see if the valve opens and closes mechanically. So like if like the electrically the solenoid was bad, but you wanted to check pressures and everything, you would put this over the valve and it would hold it open while you're doing your thing to make sure everything else is functioning. Because when you're going to work on something like this, don't just look at the very first problem you see and say, oh, get that part, go get it. Look how many problems I had on this unit. So if I looked at the one and said, I'm gonna go get that part and fix it, and then I had 5 other problems. Now some of these I couldn't see till I fixed the first one. Like I couldn't check pressures, I couldn't check anything until I got that fan running properly. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna have the right pressures. So there are instances, but I know a lot of people, they don't take the time to check everything, and even after they change the part, they run it for a minute, see it's running, and don't make sure that everything else is good. But if it's your business, your company, you spend that extra couple of minutes to make sure everything's working right and it doesn't leak. Because if they call you later and you're not even in the area and you have to go back, you lost money. Because you could have been at someone else's house making money. No, you got to go back to the one you already got paid for and spend more time on that job. You're losing money. So spending that extra minute or two on any job you do, making sure the part you replaced is fixed and not having any other problems. Otherwise, you're going to go back and you're going to be hemorrhaging money. Because you're not taking the time to fix the job and make sure what you did is correct. So now, this solenoid here has to be open. We opened it, and we were able to charge it. Now, how does this thing work? And I haven't got the expansion valve. That thermostat that I showed you a minute ago, this thermostat right here, is sensing the air flowing in the back of that coil, on the outside of the unit. You can look behind it, and you just see this metal hanging in the air, okay? So that's sensing the air coming in, and it's sensing the temperature of the air. When it gets to a specific temperature, it shuts that valve off. Now the compressor on the roof is still running. All I did was stop Freon from going into the evaporator. Okay? Does that affect my cooling?
Yes.
What happens if I stop the Freon? No cooling's being done, right? So the fans are still running because if we look at the diagram, that one thermostat only is in control of that solenoid. So it stopped the Freon. But what happened when this valve didn't open?
It stopped flowing.
But I said when this valve wasn't closed, what was the reason why I was here in the first place? Because I thought what?
Restriction.
Restriction. And we got a restriction, you know, you're supposed to have, let's say 300 on the high side and 60 on the low side, right? Well, with that unit, I couldn't get it above 10 PSI. Well, if my cutout was 16, so what would happen? Whenever the pressure got so low, the compressor would shut off on the pressure switch, and then it would cycle on. But with this valve closed and all the Freon trapped in the condenser and the compressor off, the Freon wouldn't equalize. It'd be like a total restriction in the refrigeration system. So what happens is, thermostat says, hey, we're 36 degrees in the refrigerator. Stop, stop, stop. So it shuts off this valve. No more Freon. Fans are still running. Compressor on the roof has no idea what's going on. It's doing its thing. Now, because this valve's closed, the low side, which was 60, is going to pull down and down and down. And when it gets below 16, it's going to shut off the entire system on the roof. Now all the Freon's trapped in the condenser, not the evaporator, the condenser. It's called a pump down. When you want to do a clean out on an AC coil, we close the liquid line so it doesn't go out to the evaporator, and we let the compressor suck all the Freon out of the evaporator and pump in the condenser, then we close the suction line, and all that Freon stays outside. I can take the evaporator out, put soap on it, clean it with some coil cleaner, put it back in, braze it back in, suck all the air out of that side of the system, open the valves back up, and it's already charged. I just trapped all the Freon outside. And that's what this valve is doing, is trapping all that Freon outside. And then the compressor shuts off on a low pressure switch. Now, how do we get it to turn back on? Because if I close this valve, I created a restriction. Now, if the low pressure switch then shut the unit off, and all that Freon's trapped in the condenser, what happens next?
Use the magnet to turn it back on.
No, how does, it's gotta maintain the pressure itself, so what happens now?
The fans are gonna kick on,
So what?
the fans.
The fans are always on. They never cycle off. But there's no Freon in the coil, so what's happening to the temperature of my refrigerator? There's no Freon. Some of that, Francois, you-
Meaning warm.
You know,
oh, it's me.
Was continuously like trying to run.
No, but what happens is, again, follow me now. Thermostat says refrigerator's cold. Shuts this valve off, no more Freon goes in the evaporator. Now the compressor's pumping the Freon into the condenser and pulls a vacuum. The low pressure switch says shut that roof off. So it shut off on low pressure, but all the Freon's trapped there, so it's still low pressure. How does it come back on?
Just flows back through the compressor back to the suction line. No.
No, it doesn't go back through the compressor. The valves in the compressor don't let it backfeed.
The pressure switches turn on.
No, the pressure switch turn it off, but they only cycle on and off during normal operation.
So would it go back to the tank, the reservoir tank that's up top? No.
No, what happens is that this thermostat here, which is what closed that valve, now that it's not cooling, the thermostat's measuring air temperature. So when I close this valve, I have no more Freon here. I just have fans circulating the air. Like right now, I turn the air off, it's starting to get a little warm in here. It's not as cold as it was at first. Well, same thing in the cooler. If I turn off the Freon on this valve here, whether the compressor's running or not, this is gonna start getting warm.
Right.
But that thermostat in there is going to close when it's warm. It's gonna energize this valve, and all the Freon that was trapped in the condenser now is gonna do what? Go into the evaporator and go back to the compressor. And at that point, the Freon is going to go up to the compressor and increase the pressure on the low side of the system and cycle it back on.
And then
So our low pressure switch will go above 15 or 16 or whatever it was, and the compressor will start running. Then this shuts off the valve, and this valve causes a restriction, and that restriction causes the low pressure switch to shut it off. So in other words, normally in a refrigerator we got thermostat. When it gets cold, it shuts off. When it gets warm, the thermostat comes on. We're still doing that here in the evaporator. When it gets cold, we shut it off, and then we let it back on. But this case, two things happen. I was told by one of the instructors, the AC instructor, because again, I'm saying, well, if I just had a thermostat, why put this valve here? Can I just run a wire from this thermostat up to the roof and shut the compressor off? Isn't that going to do the same thing?
Yeah.
Well, there was two other things that we didn't talk about, and I'll go to them now. He said that this here is a liquid line valve. And think about this now. Freon is either in vapor or liquid form. Okay, let me see this for a second. So imagine this is my Freon tank, okay? I have liquid here. You guys can all see the liquid in here, can't you? But on top here, there's air in here, right? So I have liquid and vapor, gas. Freon in a Freon tank is all Freon, but liquid Freon and vapor Freon. Okay? So when the unit's off, we do have vapor, but not liquid. So let's go back to this thing here. This valve, when it's off, keeps the liquid out of the evaporator. The compressor and condenser are on the roof. Well, if I turn this upside down, what happens to the liquid?
Gravity.
Gravity does that. So now, if I turn it off on the roof and the system's completely open, all the Freon in liquid form is going to go back down into the walk-in cooler. But the other thing is when it's hot, it's vapor, but when it's cold, it's liquid. in the refrigerator unit, some of these are walk-in coolers, could be 10, 15, 20 degrees below zero depending on the freon. Well, that freon at that temperature is liquid. So all the liquid refrigerant would flood the evaporator, and now when the compressor's on, it'll take forever for it to pull that freon. Now imagine this same system is in a restaurant in New York, and they have that condenser on the roof of the building, and it's 0 degrees outside. That would also cause a problem with our liquid and vapor. So this valve is preventing liquid from coming in here. So thermostat shuts the valve stops the freon. That creates a restriction, and the low pressure control shuts the system down. Thermostat calls for cooling, opens the valve, freon fills the evaporator, low pressure control sees that freon coming in, turns the compressor back on. But they could have taken this and just ran a wire from here to the contactor on the roof and turned the compressor on and off like any air conditioner in a home. Your thermostat on the wall has a wire that goes to the unit on the roof, and when you call for cooling, it tells that to come on. But in this case, that valve is doing double duty. It's causing the cycling of the compressor, but it's also there to keep the liquid from forming in the evaporator. Now let's talk about this expansion valve. Expansion valve normally doesn't have all these equalizing hoses on it. A regular, let's see here. Oh, a regular expansion valve almost acts like a gas regulator. You have an opening for it to come in, okay? And then you have an opening like this, and you have a little T-shaped thing like a golf tee, and there's a rubber disc here and a spring on top, but the gas comes out here. Let me just clean this up just a little bit here. Hold on a second. So if the pressure's too low, okay, the disc that is going up and down by the freon pressure goes down and opens it up and allows more freon to go out. If there's too much freon, it goes up and it closes this here, restricting the flow. So that's an expansion valve, not a thermostat expansion valve. An expansion valve is like a gas regulator on a stove or a dryer. It's constantly going up and down depending on the pressures, allowing the freon to flow through, okay? But a thermostat expansion valve is, instead of using just a spring, you have a sensing bulb which is on the evaporator. So this is your freon evaporator. I'll use a different color. This is your freon evaporator. Freon comes in here and goes out the suction. So we put this bulb on the suction, and we have this on the entrance coming in. This is our expansion valve here. So this piece is there. So what happens is it's sensing the temperature here. If I have too much liquid refrigerant, I could damage my compressor, right? Because this line's going to my compressor. So too much liquid refrigerant, can't get that thing to disappear. Great. Oh, I'm using the wrong mouse. That would help, right? So this expansion valve will open and close depending on demand. If there's a lot of heat going over the evaporator, okay, that's going to change my suction, and that valve's going to either open or close depending on demand. In this case, if there's not enough heat, some of the freon can go out as a liquid instead of vapor. We don't want that to happen. So this senses it's too cold, and it tells this one, hey, you got too much liquid coming out, we could damage the compressor. Restrict the flow going into the evaporator. Like imagine a movie theater. When is the most time people go to a movie?
Evenings.
In the evening, at night, right? So during the day though, don't you think they have the AC running? But there's nobody in these big rooms. There's no heat load. There's always heat, but not as much as 200 people in a movie theater. So that unit now has a very low heat load, so expansion valve would restrict how much freon goes in the evaporator. But when a bunch of people start coming in, the expansion valve says, hey, there's a lot of heat. Let more Freon in to absorb that heat. So that's what this expansion valve's doing, is it's sensing the suction line, and if it's too much Freon, it restricts it. If it's not enough Freon, it opens based on what we call superheat. That's the temperature of the suction line.
Superheated vapor.
Superheated vapor. So, look at all the problems we had. We had no Freon. We had a bad fan motor. We had a king valve leaking Freon. We had someone who broke the valve, and we're not going to throw that person under the bus. And then we also had a bad pressure switch that was given to me till we got two separate pressure switches and had to wire them in. And then we still had a problem with this thermostat was stuck in the open position. But all the other problems that we fixed were problems that this machine had. And this is something we had to run into. You got a question?
Theoretically, could it have just been the thermostat from the start?
No,
Yes,
because
it
we put
was.
gauges on it and there was no Freon in it. And then when we added Freon, did you see the leak that was coming out of the pressure switch? Or you came in after?
I came in after.
Okay, I'll show you.
But I think I saw like a brief moment.
Yeah,
of it,
like right here. So the fan was running really, really slow too,
Yeah.
okay? That's how fast the condenser fan was running.
But it was running fine. Remember that one day that we checked it?
And when you came, we probably changed the motor already. The fan motor was never
I
running
came,
fine.
I came right after Paul charged it. Paul charged it. Remember, we had run the
We never had the fan running full speed.
It was running full speed because we were like, wow, this is cooling off the
This-
heated pipe.
That video was way back at the beginning. I recorded that video like the first or second day we ever worked on it. You might not have
Oh.
been on the roof when we did it.
Oh, okay. Then that might have been after
So,
Paul charged it.
So that right there, and then, so I knew the fan wasn't working, so that's where I checked Freon before I went any further, because why did I check Freon, guys? We saw the fan running, but what did I have to do to get the fan to run?
The concept.
I had to push on the contact, which meant I didn't have enough Freon in my system. And so we put our gauges on it, we didn't see Freon, and so we added nitrogen first and couldn't see where the leak was. So then we came back and put a little bit of Freon, charged it, and we put dye in there. And that's where we ran across, there.
We got it.
And that's the pressure switch here, and you can see it leaking out of the pressure switch. So I mean, that's definitely bad.
Yeah.
Because they weren't even near that with the gauges, so it wasn't like they spilt it onto that, it was just dripping off of it.
You do.
Okay, so we had Freon leak, we had a restriction caused by a thermostat was stuck in the open position, we had a bad condenser fan motor, we had a bad king valve that was leaking Freon, and we had pressure switches that weren't working either. Because even when we had the right Freon, the pressure switches kept shutting off on that little manual reset that was on the top of it, on these top resets. Now on this one here, it actually has 4 wires, so you could actually wire the high pressure, low pressure as 2 separate units. But this one only had 2 wires that went through both the high and the low at the same time. Okay, so that's how we wired that up. Any other questions, guys? No? That was a lot, right?
A lot of issues.
Yeah.